Good evening. My name is Cristina Fraile. I'm the ambassador of Spain in Vienna, and I wish you a very warm welcome to the Europa House, the House of the European Union in Vienna. This is yet another sign of generosity of my friend Martin Selmayr. He is the real host this evening, but he asks me to welcome you, so thank you for that, dear Martin. Thank you also to all the other participants in the round table. Former Minister Ursula Plasnik, Ignacio Torreblanca, and Ivan Krastev, and very special thanks to the Austrian Society for European Politics and to its director, Paul Schmidt, for moderating the discussion this evening. The topic of today's discussion is Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and its consequences for Europe. In fact, this war has ripple effects all over the world, but for the sake of today's discussion, let's concentrate on Europe. Putin's launching of a cruel and unjust war has not only destroyed lives, houses, and infrastructures, it has also unveiled vulnerabilities that the European Union and its member states have been ignoring for too long. The pandemic had already made us realize that we had offshored the manufacturing of essential goods, such as medical supplies, a fact that sadly cost us thousands of lives. And at the same time, it set off disruptions in global supply chains, especially those originating in Asia, thus causing more shortages of food, of crucial building materials, of microchips. This caused, in turn, rises in prices and inflation. Now, the additional vulnerabilities uncovered by Russia's war of aggression include our dependence on Russian gas, disruptions on cereal imports from the Black Sea, and in general, our excessive dependence on third countries on key areas such as health, energy, food, or digital technology. There is, of course, don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with being dependent. But being too dependent on very few or only one supplier might not be very wise, especially not very wise in a geostrategic context defined inter alia by growing competition for critical raw materials and new technologies, the impact of mega trends such as climate change and aging societies, and where key multilateral organizations and the rules-based order are being questioned or directly eroded. In order for the EU to be able to face these challenges, already in October 2020, the 27 EU member states endorsed the concept of open strategic autonomy as the key for guiding Europe's repositioning in the world. Working on the progress already brought about by the preceding presidencies, the open strategic autonomy is going to be one of the pillars of my government when taking up the presidency of the EU Council next July 1st. This will include, with the help of member states, the Council and the Commission, the thorough assessment of our vulnerabilities and strengths, because we also have strengths, both present and future, and the mainstreaming of the concept of open strategic autonomy into the debates at different Council meetings. For example, an informal European Council meeting in Granada in October will be specifically dedicated to discussing the future of the open strategic autonomy. So, if we want to be more strategically autonomous, we need to reindustrialize Europe, to widen our partnerships, including through association and trade agreements with other regions of the world. These renewed partnerships with Latin America, with Asia, with Africa, will make us stronger and fitter to face a changing geostrategic context. Aware of this need, the Spanish presidency will be organizing a summit with Latin America and the Caribbean, which will be taking place in Brussels in July, and a high-level meeting with our Mediterranean neighborhood at the end of the year. Russia's aggression on Ukraine has brought with it, ironically, exactly the opposite of what it purportedly wanted to achieve, NATO has grown bigger, and so is the list of applications to become an EU member state. Ukraine is now officially a candidate country, and this brings with it a whole new set of questions about enlargement, pace, conditions, and procedures. Allow me to state at this point that during our semester as EU chair, we will spare no effort to drive the enlargement agenda forward, just as we have always done in previous EU presidencies, and that at the end of the Spanish presidency, the Ukrainian accession process to the EU will have moved significantly forward. I quote now Prime Minister Sanchez when he said that Spain will be prepared to support and accompany Ukraine in the process of realizing Ukraine's legitimate aspirations to become a full member of the European Union. Beyond the enlargement issue, the impact of the Russian aggression against Ukraine is constantly on the agenda of the Foreign Affairs Council. Last Monday, it discussed the implementation of the EU Action Plan on the geopolitical consequences of the Russian aggression. This is, and I quote, a key instrument, this plan is a key instrument setting out the EU's strategy to increase its bilateral engagement with key partners in its immediate neighborhood, in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. The aim of the plan is to strengthen EU partnerships around the world through political and economic engagement and the key use of the Global Gateway Initiative. In the end, the war in Ukraine that Putin has started has been a wake-up call for Europe, for European unity and solidarity, and it has taught us once again that we can fight a crisis better and overcome it quicker if we do it united. This idea will be at the core of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the European Union. In this vein, I look forward to listening to the discussion today, as I am convinced that the experts' contributions to the debate will help us to better understand what is at stake. For your attention, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador Christina, for your presentation, for the ideas which you put in front of us, which will help us, which will help me organize the debate which is going to follow. Good evening to everyone here in this beautiful venue of the EU House, the House of the European Union in Vienna, Austria, and then also good evening, of course, to everyone in front of the screens, because we're live streaming today's event. Now, I would like to introduce the panelists of today's debate and ask them to come up and join me here. And I would like to start with Ursula Plasnik. Welcome, Madam Plasnik. It's a pleasure to have you. Please. She doesn't have to be introduced, but I will do it anyway, just 2-3 words, if I may. Former diplomat, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, very outspoken on EU affairs, and someone who helps us, I think, pushing the debate on EU integration. We're thankful for this, and thank you for joining us. I would very much also like to welcome Ivan Kraschev. Hello, Ivan. Please. Ivan is a political scientist, a political analyst, a book author. I'm sure you have written some of his very, very interesting books, and he's also a permanent fellow of the Institute for Human Sciences in Austria, Vienna. Ivan, thank you for joining. Good to have you. And I would also like to welcome now, of course, Ignacio Torreblanca from Madrid. Ignacio Torreblanca, political analyst, political scientist. He teaches at the university in Madrid. He is also a journalist, and he heads the European Council on Foreign Relations office in Madrid, and geopolitical expert, if I may say. Great to have you, Ignacio. And last, but of course not least, the host of this venue and a very good friend and great expert of EU affairs, Martin Sellmeier. Someone which I really don't have to introduce to you. He is, but you of course know that he is the head, not only the host of this nice venue, he's the head of the representation of the European Commission in Austria, and a very close colleague, which we do cooperate on many issues, and I'm grateful for that. Now, to kickstart the discussion, I would like to pick up with some of the conclusions that the ambassador has actually already taken. She has talked about geostrategic autonomy, open geostrategic autonomy. She's talked about, as a consequence of the war, a boost for EU enlargement, but also of a global gateway strategy, which is becoming more and more important, and about not a decoupling, but about a redistribution of risks, I think, and an international outreach of the European Union. I think that is something that needs to be discussed thoroughly also here in Austria. About dependencies and the role that dependencies play, and the rule-based order, and about the changes and transformation of this rule-based order. So we already have some of the features that we're going to discuss today here on the table, presented by Christina. And I would like to start with Ursula Plasting, if I may. Ursula, what are your main takeaways? What are the main implications of this war from your point of view?
Well, difficult to sort of formulate it as ready to take away pieces, but let me have a try. The first thing is the destruction of what we had as a European security architecture. That was the first victim, I think, of, in a structural way, of Putin's war of aggression. We have been trying to persuade ourselves for maybe too long that the Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter of the OSCE are the foundations accepted by everybody living on this continent. And we have to conclude that this is no longer the case, and that we will not be able to redo this easily and to organize European security in the way we did it so many years ago. The Helsinki Final Act dates back to 1975. So what are we going to do about this? What has changed in the security environment, in the security policy of Europe? First of all, the Americans are back more, and in a different way than we would have expected only a couple of years ago. This is a fact, we have to live with it. We also face the fact that NATO is expanding. Ironically, this is one of the achievements of Vladimir Putin. Nobody wants to join, by the way, we're talking enlargement, nobody wants to join either the Russian Federation or China. But there are a couple of countries wanting to join the European Union. So we're talking about a way of life, a political system, a system of values that is under a very heavy stress test. But we are learning our lessons, and we are learning our lessons very, very rapidly. In preparation of today's meeting, I looked into the latest council conclusions, and it's really not easy to believe that this is, I'm quoting to you from a council conclusions from the 20th of March, and it's titled Speeding Up the Delivery and Joint Procurement of Ammunition for Ukraine. So this is what we are doing in the European Union now. We don't have much experience on doing it, but we have come, and in my analysis, rather quickly and rather efficiently to act together. A lot of people make fun of President Macron, who, like all French people, loves the debate and loves the provocation. And in so many points, he is right. It's just not very nice to face what he is saying on a lot of matters. And all his talk about strategic autonomy, and he was the one, European sovereignty, who started the debate and started the formulations, he is damn right. I am sorry, unless we get our act together as European Union, both in the neighborhood, but also in a larger sense in the global village, we cannot take ourselves seriously, and we will not be a serious partner for anybody. So the big conclusion or takeaway to start with for me is time to wake up, time to become serious, and we are proving it one day after the other that we are ready for that we are already in the act of acting, but also in the act of preparing what comes next. And last, maybe introductory point from my side, we do well in establishing a sort of inventory of bad dependencies as Europeans. Every crisis, one of my students once said, is a revealer. Every crisis reveals something that we don't want to see normally when there's no crisis. So what does this crisis reveal? It reveals that we do not only depend on energy too much of others, but on a lot of other issues and subject matters. So we have to go through this long list through the inventory, what I would call an inventory of bad dependencies. And this is exactly what the European Commission is doing right now.
And then hopefully we know what the good dependencies are so that we can make headway there.
Yes, I just spent a weekend in India, I must say, and it was another one of these revealing experiences for us, because I think that in a way the Americans have focused our attention on the Chinese, not only the Americans, but also they have managed to focus our attention very much on the Chinese-American rivalry, the old hegemon, the new hegemon, the whole complex story. But there are other people in the global village. There are only, I think, 36 or 37 countries out of 193 who are sharing the sanctions, who are participating in the sanctions against Russia because of this war of aggression. And that should give us a lot of issues to think about. We cannot just accept that everybody in the global village is more or less of our opinion. No, it's not true. And it's interesting to listen to the Indians, to their point of view. If you take India and China together, I mean, this is half of the world's population. So there is a different kind of dynamic there. They want to develop on their own, in their own way. They will lead, as it did before, the new non-aligned, and this is going to be one of the power shapers already now. It's not in the near future, it's now that these things are happening. So we better go and look for partners in the world, be serious about it. We will discuss this, I think, in a number of regional contexts. Last point, we should also look to our own public opinions, because it's not granted. It's not granted that people support what we're doing at European level. We are very much focused, all of us, on what the strategic outline is, what we have to do, and how we can help the Ukraine. But we must also not neglect our own public opinion. They are under stress. People are insecure. They need orientation. They need explanation. When so many things change so rapidly, the explanatory side of politics must be forcefully put into place. Governments have to talk to their people. They have to lead them to follow them in what the decisions on the European level are about. And we've seen a number of elections recently, and we will have more elections that show that post the impact of the pandemic, which maybe some of us have underestimated in terms of public opinion and resistance. But also, on the other hand, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why is this so important? Why is there a real watershed moment? And I deeply believe there is a watershed moment that was furnished by Vladimir Putin. He didn't mean to do that. But I think it was a wake-up call for most of us. And we should be open about it. We should face it. That's the only strategy that will help us.
Okay, thank you. Ivan, over to you. Do you think that we have managed to wake up? Have we woken up already? Ursula has mentioned those two dimensions, looking within the European Union. How does public support, public opinion evolve on the one hand, on the other hand, the international outreach and the global role of the European Union that has to be reshaped? And then Christina also mentioned the issue of cohesion and the team play within the European Union. How much unity is there within the European Union? I'm looking forward to your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much. It's one thing to wake up, the other is to get out of the bed. This is not the same. So from this point of view, I do believe waking up is not enough. But listen, I want to start with something.
Are we still in bed?
I do believe we are on our way to get out. But I want to start with something that is obvious, but it might needs to be repeated. This war is changing the basic assumptions on which the European Union has been building its security. First, economic interdependence means security. You are going to trade so much with everybody that this is not going to allow them to start fighting you. So from this point of view, when people say even about the Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2, that this was a commercial project, they were meant to be security projects. They were meant to set Russia is going to be so much dependent on buying their gas that they're never going to risk starting a war in Europe. And they will understand that this is not true. That economic interdependence can be a source of security, but can become a major source of vulnerability. So this is suddenly you start to rethink all your security policies. Because the second was, particularly after the American war in Iraq, the conclusion in Europe was military power has lost a lot of its purchase power. Americans were extremely powerful military. What did they achieve? And as a result of it, and if you're going to read the security doctrine from 2003, this was a major focus on economic power and soft power. But listen, military power doesn't matter, particularly when you don't have it. The day the war started, Ukraine has ammunition for 6 weeks. Germany for 2 days. Suddenly you discover that basically you cannot simply ignore the fact that military power is part of a power equation. And for the moment, of course, we are totally relying on the United States, but even this cannot go forever, particularly keeping in mind that Europe is not at the center of the American strategic interest anymore. And if we talk even about new confrontation between the United States and China, we are much more in the position in which Japan was during the Cold War. We are not on the major theater. So from this point of view, you should have certain type of capacity of your own. Thirdly, and this is interesting, so we didn't believe that the war was possible because we didn't want to have it. But secondly, the fact that we never managed to predict, and here Americans were not better than us, that the Ukrainians are going to stand in the way they stand it, that they are going to have the will but also the capacity to resist, reveals one another type of a problem for the European Union, and particularly the transformative power of civic nationalism. Listen, European Union is a post-national project, and what you saw in Ukraine basically was the power of a national mobilization when you're defending your country. People were ready to die. So we have been all socialized in a famous Brechtian sentence that we should feel pity for people, for nations that need heroes. But there are moments in which you need heroes. And I do believe this was also an intellectual challenge for the European Union. And the last is something that also Ursula Plasnik said, our view of the world. As a result of this war, we lost part of our exceptionalism. Before, everybody believes that major wars are possible, but not in Europe. And suddenly it's not the case. We became like everybody else, and paradoxically, one of the reactions to the non-Western powers to the war in Ukraine was saying, okay, it's a bad thing, but you know what? It happens to us all the time. Why the war should be more important to us because it happens in Europe. And I do believe this geographic envy, which you can see, saying why your war is more important than our war, is something that we are going to see more and more. So, and I want to end on this. European Union is in this really critical juncture in which, in order basically to be successful, standing against Russia, we need natural resources from other places. We need allies in other places and so on. But at the same time, we are much more focused on Europe than ever before because the war is happening in Europe. And this creates a situation in which, on one level, the war created this idea of a common impulse that we need each other. So in a way, if the European Union did not exist, it should be invented. But on the other, the truth is that the war also, talking about awakening, a walk along historical traumas and fears in different European societies. You can see something that I find particularly interesting. Because of this war, Eastern Europe was totally remade, because for all of you, when you talk about Eastern Europe before, you mean the post-communist countries. And then the post-communist period lost its importance. What came back is the old imperial histories. Suddenly, if you see the reactions to the war, you're going to have a very different reaction of the public opinion in countries like Poland or the Baltic republics that have been part of the Russian Empire, and in countries like Bulgaria, for example, Serbia and others that have been part of the Ottoman Empire. So suddenly you realize that we can have a common European dream, but nightmares are strictly national. And I do believe this is a kind of a real challenge for the European Union, because in a certain way, in order to act, we want the war to be as important for the Spaniards as for the Poles. And this is not easy to achieve, and also I agree very much that there is also dynamics of the war, because I do believe that there is a level of honesty which is very important for this type of a question, for this type of a discussions that is going to make European Union kind of effective. When the war started, people expected the Russia to win, and they didn't. And part of the miracles of what the Ukrainians did created certain type of a unity. So European Council on Foreign Relations have been polling over the time. And 1 year after the war started, there was a strong European consensus standing behind Ukraine, because also the Ukrainian victories managed to convince Europeans that they can make it. But the reality is that in the first year of the war, any moment the Russians were not winning, they were losing. In the second year, anytime the Ukrainians are not winning, they're losing. And this is why the counteroffensive is so important, and this is why the time factor is so important. And I'm saying this because I very much agree with the previous speakers. We cannot take European Union for granted.
But Ivan, you've just mentioned the unity of the European Union, which is one of the consequences, actually, of the war. But then this unity will be under stress. And what do you think needs to be done to make sure that this cohesion and unity can be maintained?
Listen, one of the most important and interesting stories for the moment for the unity to work was that as a result of this war, some of the Eurosceptic nationalistic parties and so on were forced to realize that the biggest danger for the sovereignty of their country does not come from Brussels, but comes from Russia. So you have Melonis of this world deciding that basically it is not about Brussels. So as a result of it, it reconciled some of this. On the other side, basically, it pushed many pro-Europeans to understand that in a certain way, you need a geopolitical Europe, which means basically a major standing. And honestly speaking, that we cannot build our identity based on distinguished from the Americans, because this is simply not going to work like this. Some people have been believing, for example, in 2003, when was the Iraqi war. I'm saying this because in order for this to work, first, the Commission played a very important role. The truth is that the Commission took the role to be the spokesperson for this kind of a European unity, even before the governments have agreed how united they are. But secondly, this is going to be a challenge. First, because the Commission is in the last year of its term. We're going to European elections. There are politicians in this panel, and they know that European elections are elections in which anti-system parties traditionally overperform. Secondly, the war was at the center of the public opinion for the first 6 or 7 months, but people have the tendency to change their focus. And you can end up with other crises and kind of other things. And we're going to have a difficult elections for the European Union exactly for this. And the last is about the European enlargement. We're now talking Ukraine and the Western Balkans. Imagine that there's going to be a certain electoral result in Turkey, which goes on the fact that the new Turkish government declared that they're making joining the European Union and their major priority, and they're going to vote it down, certain type of a legislation that European Union have been opposing. On one level, this is kind of a major success for the European Union because it is so important to have allies around. On the other side, imagine what it means basically at one and the same time to discuss Ukraine, Moldova, Western Balkans, Turkey. This is not the union that we know. And this is my story. You cannot achieve what you want believing that we are going to do what we have been doing before, being on the level of economic policies, being on the level of the normal enlargement. You cannot integrate Ukraine in the European Union in the way you integrated Bulgaria. It is not going to be like this. It should be something totally different, for good or for bad. And realizing that something has ended and that European Union is in a reinvention period, for me, is the most important story. By the way, in the way Ukraine is a reinvention period. And believe me, the war Russia is different than the Putin's Russia that we know from before.
Now, when you ask people if they want change, they might say, yes, of course we want change. But if you ask them, do you want to change, then the story might be a different one. And we are in this change of an era, which is, yes.
When
Ivan.
people say that they want change, they want others to change.
Yes. And then watch them from their couch, maybe. No, I'm cynical, which I don't want to be. But there's so much.
You're cynical. I'm Bulgarian, so it's easy.
I know you're a Bulgarian optimist, Ivan. But this geopolitical transformation of Europe is actually at the core, I think, of it's a momentum which we live in, and what we all try to do is understand what this transformation implies and how to get the support for this transformation, which also produces rejection, actually. So you have to walk a fine line in this times of change. Ignacio, how can we bridge these two developments? Becoming a geopolitical actor and becoming much more international and having a much bigger outreach in order to spread dependencies, no? On the one hand, on the other hand, not losing the support and being able to explain why we do this at home. No, it seems like a mission impossible.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think, we can start by acknowledging that the EU was not designed to be a geopolitical actor. It was not designed to do these kind of things. It was designed to assure civilian peace and peace among us within Europe. And we subcontracted security to the US and to to two countries, Britain and France, right? For all the other things and so on, right? So, and we've been struggling to understand what is the relationship between the European integration process and the environment and the external environment for quite a while. And at some point, I think after 2008, the domestic reasons or the domestic impulses for European integrations were exhausted. And many people thought that, the Lisbon Treaty was a high water and that nothing else would happen. Then we started to experience external crises. And for those who thought that, okay, maybe we have an external federator, it didn't go well. Because, and this, Ivan has written a lot about this, but, the financial crisis divided us, the Syrian refugee crisis divided us, Ukraine in 2014 divided us, So we didn't find the strength from pressures abroad, even if we were discussing strategic autonomy and all these things. And it's a fortune now that the trend has been reversed. Russia, this time, the re-invasion of Ukraine has not divided us, has put us, got us together, and we celebrated a moment of unity. And as you say, even thinking of 1 million artillery shells to be produced out of the EU budget, which I guess that in your time, someone would walk into your office and telling you that we were going to produce this, you would have to get away, get out of my office, you're just dreaming, But it's true. I'm trying also to connect what Ivan and Ursula were saying, that the two main contributions of the European Union, apart, of course, from macroeconomic assistance and the 10 or 11 packages of sanctions, would be to deliver on two things. One is on security, to be able to establish and to guarantee a security order for Europe, which will be complementary and working with the US, but will be basically our responsibility. So, it's going to be 80 years now that our security is being granted by the US, right? And on the one hand, NATO has been revitalized, and we're all very happy about this. But is this pushing beyond or closer the moment in which, as Ivan said, we not only wake up, but get out of bed, dress, get a uniform, and do policies, right? Is this it? Because we see also some countries saying Ukraine puts an end to the question of European security. Yes, okay, NATO is going to be, and the US, the main security provider for Europe. But is this enough for us? Don't we have a responsibility farther than that? And is this being strengthened by the war in Ukraine? Do we see, let me say, the Finns or the Swedes saying, I want to join a battle group, and I want to strengthen common foreign security policy? Not exactly, not at this moment. We haven't asked about this, but is there obligation under the treaties as well? And I know this is a complicated question in Austria as well, right? But in which time and how do we do this is an open question still. And then this is the question of enlargement. The true way of providing security is to be able to design something which we know nothing about, which is what is the institutional setup of an enlarged European Union covering the Western Balkans to Ukraine and Moldova, and you brought Turkey into this, and then it makes it even more complicated. But even let's leave Turkey aside for a while. If just in these conditions, are we? We've been there before in debates about enlargement and institutional reform, and we've sorted them out. But how can we? And I think is the European political cooperation enough? Is this an ante-room or a waiting room for membership or something? I know that it's difficult, where you're solving urgent problems on a day-to-day basis to start thinking about this. But traditionally, European Union main contribution to stability in Europe has been enlargement. This has been, sending the 200 pages of acquis communautaire to a country is much more effective than sending tanks, and the transformative power. It's 200,000 pages of acquis communautaire. It expands and expands, So we're going to be confronting hard questions, and we need to also, of course, as Ivan said, win or not lose or decide on all these things, but at the same time live up also to our responsibilities, both in terms of enlargement, institutional reforms, and security policy, because the US is not maybe going to be there all the time around. And at some point, some countries in Europe may discover that NATO may end up being an alliance between the European Union and the Democratic Party of the United States, not really a transatlantic alliance in many senses, So there are hard choices and things looming over there, which introduce some questions on how good we feel at this time about just having been divided by Russia, and having done incredible things in the last year.
I think we need to have a clear sense and orientation where all this is going, which is difficult at the moment, but we do need that in order to start a discussion also at home and get the public and political support for this. But Ignacio, you have posed a lot of questions, which I would just hand over to Martin, which makes my job easier. On the one hand, the issue of enlargement, how well, I mean, that's a process that is actually speeding up. It has never gone that fast, and it's growing on a daily basis, in fact. Are we ready for this enlargement? Do we have to be ready? What are the institutional consequences? Is this the moment to be prepared, or do we need to get prepared later on? So that's my first question from the many questions which I have in my head, but I leave it there at the moment, and then we continue.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this very easy question. And I think when we speak about enlargement, I'm first of all happy to sit next to a Bulgarian who is worried about membership of Turkey. That shows how far we have gone. And I'm particularly happy that we have the ambassador of Ukraine, Vasil Kimenets, sitting in the first row, because that in itself is a sign. And because we cooperate very closely here together in Vienna. He's an excellent ambassador, as you all know. And I think when he and I discussed more than a year ago whether Ukraine would ever become a candidate, I think we would not have dreamt that it would go that far and so that fast. And I think sometimes we have perhaps to be a bit more courageous about what we expect. Ursula Plasnik has said we are at a watershed moment. I think the European Council says it's a tectonic shift. Olaf Scholz says it's a Zeitenwende. I think they're all the same things. But I have sometimes the impression we haven't ourselves understood what that really means. And I'm very frank, I haven't understood what it really means. Because what does it mean, this tectonic shift? It means something changes fundamentally. Zeitenwende means we are now in new times. But are we really understanding in what times we are now? Sometimes when I listen to our own conversations, the conversations in Austrian, European politics, Spanish politics, everywhere, I sometimes have the impression that Zeitenwende, some believe everything what we believed so far has been destroyed. This is a typical European reflex. We are extremely negative people. And is that really true? Now, I think we have woken up, that's right. I fully agree with this image. I think we are with at least 1 foot out of the bed, perhaps half of the second, but some of us would wish to go back to bed because it's warmer and more comfortable there. And the bed is not there anymore. But we have also to realize that if we say Putin has destroyed the international rules-based system, well, then we say Putin has won the war. I don't believe that. I think, as you said, and I think it goes a bit further than only year number 1, Putin tries to destroy the rules-based international system, but he faces resistance, not only from the European Union. It's true, on the sanctions, I agree, it's only a couple of more than 30 countries, which, by the way, are 50% of the global GDP, so it's not nothing on sanctions. However, when it comes to the question who is right, who is wrong, when you go to the General Assembly and the United Nations, we have more than 140 countries who vote together with the European Union and Ukraine and say this is an illegal act that breaches the Charter of the United Nations. So I think at the moment what we're trying to resist, this aggression against the rules-based international order, it's not destroyed. And sometimes I have the feeling it's stronger alive than it ever was before, because we never had such votes in the General Assembly of the United Nations where a member of the Security Council was condemned by 140 or 150 members of the United Nations. So this is quite a particular thing. So I agree we still have to win over the Global South, but we should also not say, oh, we are alone and nobody else is with us. That's also not true. People are with the law. Even China, if you read China's paper, China says the territorial integrity and the Charter of the United Nations must not be violated, which is identical to the peace plan of President Zelensky. They may understand different things with it, but I think the starting point is the same. So that's number 1 about the Zeitenwende. On enlargement, I think we are a funny continent, the European Union. Ursula Plasnik said it. Nobody wants to join China. Nobody wants to join Russia at the moment. We have 10 countries who want to join the European Union. And we are saying, this is terrible. Let's be frank. When we ask in Austria, not Austrian politics on this side is extremely courageous. do you want that the Western Balkans becomes a member of the European Union? I think in Austria, I think the ÖKFE public opinion survey says it, and others as well. I think about 2/3 of the population are against. Austrian government is pushing for it. So once they are very courageous and not following public opinion, but leading it, which I think is very, very important. But on enlargement, we are scared of enlargement. Ivan just sounded on the enlargement towards Turkey, which I think at the moment is a long shot. I don't see it happening at the moment, whatever the election. But let's even imagine there is a realistic chance in the next 20 years. It's interesting that Ivan sounds exactly talking about enlargement to Turkey like 20 years ago, others sounded about the enlargement towards Poland and Central and Eastern Europe. So that's why I find that so interesting, how we are changing. Zeitenwende must mean also that something has to click in our head. Not that we say everything was wrong in the past, that we have to pull ourselves together, get out of bed, yes, right, but also say, my goodness, on the 9th of November of 1989, it was another Zeitenwende, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Everybody thought before Europe would be divided by forever, and suddenly it was possible to integrate 10, 13 countries in the European Union. Now we have another Zeitenwende, and I don't think it will only be negative, because I think Putin has not only lost the war, Ukraine will win the war, and it's not a war of aggression, it's a war of self-defense. That is a totally different thing. And therefore, I think we should sometimes be a bit brave, think about the future, prepare for it, and think about the European Union in the year 2030 plus that has more than 30 members. That will also include Ukraine. The best thing that happened for a country like Austria, I can say that from the outside, looking at economic figures, what people say was the enlargement to the east. It was an economic miracle. Well, there's another big challenge. How often have people told me, what is the next big project for the European Union? We don't have any big project here. There was the euro, the internal market, what next? Well, thanks, Mr. Putin, you have given us one, to restore peace, stability, and wealth in the whole of Europe, and work together with our partners. And when I see, you mentioned the European political community, I don't think it's enough, it's not an alternative. It's even weaker than the European Economic Area that was offered to the Austrians and the Bulgarians and others to say, be in the waiting room. But it's nevertheless important that at a time when one country is aggressing another one in Europe, that we have meetings now, in a couple of weeks in Moldova, where they are all countries of this continent except Russia and Belarus meeting there, showing their solidarity with Moldova and showing that this aggression will face a united answer. I think this is very important and encourages me. I know it's not all perfect, but I think Zeitenwende is what we make of it. Watershed moment is what we do with the water, and that we drive it into the right direction.
But if it's a change of era, or whatever you want to call it, does the European Union then also transform itself into a geopolitical player? Does it have the power and the possibility to do so? Is it just a junior partner of the US, or how independent, how autonomous can it be on this international political scene?
Well, I think I hear a lot of it. I have to be careful because there's a certain narrative in Austria and in some other German-speaking countries in Europe about the United States of America. I'm very happy that we have the United States of America as our partner. I also don't think they are back now. I think they were already there. Even during the Trump years, they didn't withdraw their troops from Europe, they even increased them. So let's not make the mistakes of a populist politician and our transatlantic alliance. One thing passes, the other stays. I'm firmly convinced about that. I'm firmly convinced about that, and I have lived through the Trump years. There were many big challenges, but it was never, except the rhetoric that I didn't like, of course, there was never a turning back to Europe of America and others. I'm happy that we have the Americans. They have different interests than ours sometimes. That's legitimate. And we have sometimes different interests. But I think we work together with America on many, many other files. Therefore, is Europe capable of transforming itself? Well, I think we see this every day. Things happen, and Ignacio mentioned that. Yes, we created in 2018 a European peace facility. A European peace facility because the EU budget is not allowed under the EU treaties to use it for military purposes. We cannot buy weapons, ammunition under the EU budget. So in 2018, some people, it was the certainly not warmongering president of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, who at the time said, we create a European peace facility because when there is something going on in Africa, we have to be able to send weapons to those who defend the rules-based international system. We didn't know that we have to buy ammunition, but fortunately we have this pot that then could be enlarged and repurposed in this crisis. So yes, the European Union, even on something that is the most difficult thing, military matters, it's difficult for every country. It's difficult for Austria, it's difficult for Germany to get even their tanks running. But for the European Union, it's even more difficult. But even there, we are managing this now, and it doesn't work perfectly from day number one. But yes, we are managing this. What we have to get in our mind is not enough to have only a pot of money to buy ammunition. Somebody has to produce it. And our industry is not yet prepared to do that. We have to totally change it. We are not in a war industry as we have it, or in a war economy as Vladimir Putin has it. So we have to accelerate there. In the pandemic, we reinvented ourselves, not only with joint purchases of vaccines, that also nobody would have thought 3 years ago, because medical issues are member state sovereignty. Health is member state sovereignty, but where there's a will, there's a way. So is the European Union able to do that? The European Union is not something abstract, it's the joint will of 27 countries. And as Ursula Plasnik said very rightly, who helped us to get more united than ever before? Vladimir Putin. So we will not give him the Charlemagne Prize for this. I'm very sure about that. But I think sometimes, Max Weber said, the external enemy sometimes forces you to do something what you never thought is possible. And therefore, let's not go back into the bed, but let's now continue with the other leg out of the bed and get all the things done that we need to do. I think we are capable if there's a will in all national capitals, and that includes Vienna.
Thank you, Martin. Over to Ursula Plasnik, and also thank you for bridging this this statement back to the member states and the national capitals, because I would also be interested in your assessment, Ursula, how you see the Austrian support for all of these challenges which we have just mentioned. How do you see Austria's role in European integration, in transforming the European Union?
Well, maybe you should ask an acting member of government this kind of question. I can only observe from afar to stay in the imagery created by Ivan Krastev. For my taste, for my very personal taste, Austria is still too much in the waking up process, but maybe we need more, a little more time than others for our waking up process. On the other hand, and that's the interesting thing, if you look at the state of affairs from the point of view of decisions taking, and that's what counts also, not only, but also, I think Austria is doing very well. We are on board, and we were on board from the very first moment in both statements, declarations from the government, but also actions, legal action. We are with all the other members of the European Union, more than some members of NATO, also in security policy issues. So let's be serious about that. What I think is missing in Austria, but that's my private obsession in a way, is a broad public discussion on security policy, what it means in the 21st century, what it means in the context we are in right now, because that is fundamentally new. I'm a child of the Cold War. I'm born in '56. So my sort of main issue in my life as a diplomat, and also to a certain extent as a politician, was this reunification of Europe, was the year 1989. That was for me defining. It was the defining moment of my professional life. And I have spent a lot of time and brain power over the last year to sort of recapitulate and ask myself, did we get it all wrong? Me and my friends, some of them are here. Martin Sellmeier is one of them. Did we do it all wrong? Or was it smart to at least try to get into a living relationship with Russia? Russia sits on our continent. You can't change neighbors. So was it all wrong to try and work out in so many ways a good relationship with Russia. I remember José Manuel Barroso telling me once, Ursula, you wouldn't believe I spent more time with Vladimir Putin than with any other European head of state or government. And he was probably true, because we had so many schemes and plans, and we tried to make this work. Now we realize if there is criminal intent, if there is violence, which is the antipode of the European basic construction and basic idea, you can't deal with it in the same way that you deal with it among those who share this belief. So this is the deep frustration that we are facing now. And Austria is in the process of waking up. I think the government now even has realized that there is a need to adapt the security doctrine that was discussed in Parliament and was first agreed upon on governmental level, I think in 2011. That's a long time ago. This was Pröll and Faymann in government, so some of it has changed in the meantime. I'm quite glad that people in Austria, in the Ministry of Defense, do their job, that there's more money put at the disposal of the Austrian military. But still, what we need to define and to discuss with the people and also give them orientation, I think, is what is our contribution, Austrian contribution, your contribution, my contribution to European solidarity? How do we want to act under Article 42.7? What's going to be our contribution if one of us is attacked? Will we be doing pancakes or producing goulash, to be cynical? Is this the best we can? There are so many things that need to be done right now, also in the context of Ukraine. Let's think of the whole subject of impunity, of accountability. The Österreichische Gesellschaft für Europapolitik has produced a wonderful, interesting policy brief by Professor Benedek on these questions. I mean, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of documentation work to do. There is a lot of legal work to do. We have brilliant lawyers, international lawyers in Europe. This is where we could be in the lead. This is where we could contribute. Demining. I mean, demining has always been a thing that Austrians have been doing, thinking about, investing in. Can there even be a question about demining? And these are the things that come to my mind, where I have the impression that we are lagging behind in discussion, not only from the government, but also in civil society. Who keeps the universities from discussing these issues? Who keeps the think tanks from discussing these issues? I don't need to be steered in my thinking and discussion capacity by anybody, not by the Pope, not by God, not by the Bundeskanzler or anybody else.
Okay. No, I also believe that this security discussion is needed and will take place. And even we've been discussing already many elements of what could be a European security architecture, or what it should be. From your perspective, how do you envision this European security approach? If you think about enlargement, legal accountability, economic reconstruction, military capacity, what can we expect in this context over the next years?
Listen, we can expect different things, because it very much depends what kind of choices we're going to make. First of all, the nature of European borders are changing. Before, European Union was a union with hard budget and soft borders. The idea was that we basically border future member states. The border with Russia is going to be a very different border. By the way, nevertheless, when and how the war is going to end up. From this point of view, you're going to have a totally different type of a border. Talking about, this is why the problem of Turkey being in or out, in a certain way, the problem is that we're in a situation in which it's very difficult to imagine how a big country like Ukraine is going to be in the EU. The only other things which is very difficult to imagine how they're not going to be. This is the story, because of course, listen, we're talking now about big countries. This is the other thing that the European debate slightly is coming back. This is the scale. Listen, I was listening people talking about countries as if this is simply legislations, GDPs and so on. It's a territory. Ukraine is a big European country. It's a big population. So from this point of view, we're talking about major changes. And because this is a major changes, then you're asking what is going to change and how it's going to change. The things are already changing. The defense budget of Poland is 4%. And they're going to have their tanks, I do believe, faster than the Germans are going to get theirs, planes and so on, because of the nature of the risk that you feel. As a result of it, you're going to see basically, in a military terms, in 3 or 4 years, probably outside of France, you're going to have on the Russia border 2 or 3 of the big European armies. I mean, Ukrainian, Polish, and others. This is a new reality. This is a new reality because it is also going to affect the influence of the country in the decision-making process. Secondly, you should be prepared that certain things that we believed till yesterday can be changed dramatically. For example, after the refugee crisis, what Eastern Europe was famous for? That we don't like migrants. And then basically overnight, Poland get more migrants than basically anybody, Europe as a whole got during the Syrian crisis. So from this point of view, this is contextual. And you can see it, the movement of people. But also, in my view, it's very important to understand that we're changing and everything around us are changing. And listen, Russia is going to enter as a different place. One of the things that people don't see, the proliferation of the private armies. Now you know about Mr. Prigozhin. Now almost everybody in Russia wants to have their own private army. Gazprom has, the governor of Crimea is going to have one. This is a different security reality. We don't know what it means. At the same time, you're talking about the nuclear power. By the way, be prepared that we're going to have a proliferation of nuclear. Because people more and more start to believe to be sovereign, you need nuclear weapons. How Europe is going to respond to this? And by the way, this is a major story. We have one country like France, and it's not the most kind of developed nuclear capacity that we have on a global stage compared with what Americans or Chinese or Russians has. So I'm saying all this because also in economic terms, it is easy to say we are going to change this and that, but this has cost. Bulgaria easily can break its relations with China because we don't have much. But for the German business, this is not so easy. And in a certain way, this is a decision which are going to affect a lot of people. On the basis of these decisions, certain industries are going to survive or die. And honestly speaking, when we talk about auto industry, secondly, you understand that they are not national economies. If something goes wrong with the German auto cluster, there are going to be more jobs being lost in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, in Hungary, than in Germany. And I do believe we start to realize it only when you start to understand what it can mean. And this is why, for me, the problem is, and this is, it's not simply that the time has changed, the time is running very fast. What is everybody, because Ursula Plasnik said that she has an obsession with the debate. I have an obsession with timing, because politics is very much on timing. Something that is a good decision on Monday, already on Tuesday is not a good decision. The same thing. And from this point of view, for me, the biggest challenge for European Union is to dealing with timing. What you can do now. By the way, certain type of policies that you can sell to the people quite easily on the 6 months of the war, where everybody is watching television, and on television there is war as the #1 news, is going to be much more difficult to sell these same policies when, for example, #1 news is crisis of the standard of living, or here or there. So this is the story, and for me the biggest story is that, and I'm going to end up on this, I'm a political scientist. We know we're not particularly for being very profound, as you know.
You're an exception.
No, I'm not an exception, as you know very well. But political scientists, we have learned something very similar, that if you're not in an actual war, like the Ukrainians are, for everybody else, for every other government, the most important war that they have is their elections. And this is the reality, this is true, this is how democracies work. And from this point of view, we cannot divorce the future of Europe from the political cycle, from how the government are going to be successful or not successful to doing things, to believe that simply in Brussels, the president of the Commission has taken a decision and this is going to be enough. You can converge policies. You should be able to converge political sentiments. And in my view, this is the biggest challenge.
Two things that I want to pick up and pose a question to you, Ignacio, on timing and on proximity. Timing, on the one hand, related to the upcoming European elections in 2024, but on the other hand, connected to the EU Council presidency of Spain taking over. How do you see the concept of timing in that respect? Also regarding, for example, the issue of strategic autonomy and new trade agreements like Mercosur. Is this the right moment? Is this the momentum to seal it, agree on it, and implement it? And on proximity, Ivan rightly said that depending on geography and your historical experience, there are different sentiments and perceptions regarding the war in Ukraine. From a Spanish perspective, how strong is the support and how aware are people of the war in Ukraine?
Well, let me start maybe by the second, because I think it's shorter. That on the first hand, Spain is an enlargement country. So, we know what it's about, and we know what is to listen to all these kind of doom prophecies about how bad everyone was going to be doing the minute we joined. Had there been a referendum in France in 1985 about Spanish membership, they would have voted no. And maybe, with the figures of the minute, maybe for good reasons, they would say, unemployment, it was terrorism, they would fear migration. But agriculture. But you cannot ask people, and that's when leadership comes about. You cannot ask people to vote on how the world is going to look in 10 years, because this is your job. It's not their job. It's not to transfer your responsibility as a politician to people. And this is not about being paternalistic or no. It's about just doing your job. Spain would have never become member at the time. So that's one thing. And then on Ukraine, both the Balkans War and the Ukraine War has been a moment which has been key in educating an otherwise population with a political culture which came from isolationism, in which the United States played a very negative role during the Cold War, and it was actually the European Union who was seen as a democracy promoter. Spaniards and the Spanish army started to go out to the Balkans. And then, in Ukraine, this is, the support which Spanish population and Spanish political parties have given to Ukraine has been quite amazing. It is also true that this is a war that has been told, I've been like in TV from the 22nd last year trying to explain this, but fortunately there were so many Ukrainians that could perfectly explain this in plain Spanish, because they lived in Spanish, they look like people. And this was amazing, and that has to do with proximity, of course. Unfortunately, not all conflicts are equal. If conflicts can be explained in your language by someone who knows you, then that has made a difference. Then, on the second point, I don't want to get into discussion on strategic autonomy, because Ivan and everyone around hears how much time we've spent on the terms and the concept itself, and that's kind of a never-ending discussion whether there is European sovereignty, which is strategic autonomy, and it's open. I don't care much about that. The point is that I don't think the problem was that we were not autonomous. This is not the problem with Europe. The problem is that we did not manage our interdependencies strategically. We just let kind of the market decide when and how we were independent with whom. So, the price at a market for energy, you go there and buy all your energy. The fact that, semiconductors are coming from Taiwan, well, you buy all your semiconductors from Taiwan. Paracetamol is cheaper When you buy it from China, then you do it in China. We didn't look as a state. We looked as a firm. And when you go to Inditex, the world is divided in two zones. Places where you can send your stuff in 24 hours and places where you can send your stuff in 72 hours. That's it. That's the way you look at the world. And there's no other reading of that. And, it's true. We trusted globalization. We trusted markets. This is our DNA again. There was no reason not to do this. But what we have to do now, and this includes, of course, Latin America, but includes the whole world, is to strategically look at our interdependencies. We need to decide when and how we want to be independent, with whom, under which conditions, and how that improves not only our strategic autonomy. And this is a key discussion in Latin America, because we cannot go around to Latin America and to other places saying, oh, sorry, I haven't been paying much attention to you over the last 20 years, but it happens that now I have an aggressor in Europe, and then I've discovered that my digital and green transitions are in peril because I don't want to stop depending on Russian fossil fuels to start depending on Chinese turbines and batteries and all that. I need you now. No, that's not the way you can.
How important is a trade and association agreement with Latin America for Europe in that context?
I think it's key. But not just because in a moment in which trade liberalization and trade agreements are mostly out of the agenda and economic nationalism is all over the place and protectionism and reindustrialization by everyone on its own means. It's about what is the value proposition that Europe can do and can launch into countries, which includes not only trade, but the issues which they care about. And this is a pending conversation. It's not only, as I said, about trade, it's only about multilateralism. It's to try and understand, as Ursula Plassi was saying, why do these countries outside don't want to pick up, they say, like fine, 145, international law, yeah, that's wrong. But, please don't get me into your fight. I have something to say if you want to bring me into that. And I want to restore this multilateral and rules-based order, and I have something to say, you have to listen to me, and so on. So I think that is key, that it is not only the trade agreement with Mercosur. If it fails, it shouldn't be our fault. It shouldn't be our fault. And no, we cannot allow ourselves to kill kind of the only and the last kind of major trade treaty that is around. We already did that with TTIP, and then Trump showed us, that he could do much better in canceling trade treaties that we could. We could not outperform him. So, and it's not so much, about extracting benefits, and this is what China does. Kind of this extractivist look, both in terms of votes for the UN in Latin America and raw materials. So this is what China and Russia also, by the way, they want from Latin America: UN votes, raw materials, and basic food stuff. We have to come up with something which is completely different. And for that, you need to sit down and listen to what people want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ignacio. Martin, what can Europe, what can the European Union do to support the reconstruction of Ukraine?
First of all, we have to help Ukraine to win the war, because we can prepare now for reconstruction. This is a long process, but I think the precondition is that Ukraine can defend itself and win back as much territory as possible, because otherwise this will all become much more complicated. That's what we're doing. I think at the same time we need already now, and we're doing this, to start preparing for the post-war situation. The Marshall Plan was not invented in 1952. It was invented already in the early 1940s, because it was clear that there would be a reconstruction effort needed. And I think that's what we're doing at the moment. There are already, the Lugano conference, for example, is bringing already donors together. We're identifying together with the Ukrainian authorities how reconstruction should work, what the preconditions are. At the moment, we don't know exactly what the financial needs will be, but they will be big. At the moment, we are helping Ukraine to finance its daily budgetary needs. But reconstruction is a totally different scale. And I think for that, we have to start thinking about what this is for kind of a project for the European Union. It will not be all paid by public money. So it will have to be done. Also, the Marshall Plan was just seed money in many, many respects. So we have to do this properly. And I think here we have to think, as Ivan and Jose said, we have to think strategically. We have to think now for the next 10 years, because this will take a long time. I think it's a huge opportunity for Ukraine and for us to have built and help rebuilding a peaceful, strong, stable and prosperous Ukraine. And I think sometimes I have the feeling when I speak to people, including here in Austria and in other countries, that they think Ukraine is a developing country. It is not. I think when I meet Ukrainians here in Vienna, and some people say, why are not all the children here in the Austrian schools that are offered? Well, because I can tell you the internet teaching from Kiev is sometimes a bit better than here locally. I recently had a good Ukrainian friend who said after lunch, so I have to go home and I will do my tax returns. I said, your tax returns? But your tax returns in Ukraine? Yes. I do this via my app, and I do this. It's not yet possible in most European countries. So let's sometimes think what Ukraine does for example, in the digital side. They are far ahead of most European Union countries, and the other things, building the institutions, building independent judiciary and so on. I think there we have to work together in the coming years. This will be a big challenge. But I think it's a win-win situation if we do it right. And if the preconditions, if the starting points are stability, because there will be, for decades, a very unfriendly neighbor in the East. Yes, it's always said Russia is on the European continent, it will always be there. But the Russia that we have there, if it doesn't change, it will be not a Russia with whom we will shake hands. For a very, very long time until a lot of water will flow down the Danube. I would say we need something else if we want to succeed the reconstruction of Ukraine. We, as European Union, have to be also economically strong. That ties back to what Ignacio said. We should not start having the illusion that every product, we can produce it locally here in the 9th district of Vienna or in the 2nd district or wherever. It's not possible to do that. The European continent bases its prosperity, the prosperity of all our citizens. We are the most prosperous continent in the world on the fact that we are the most interconnected continent. We are 20% more connected with the rest of the world than the United States of America. We're much more self-sufficient than we are. This is also why when there's suddenly a harbor closes in China, we see the supply chain effects very painfully immediately. But also when they are open, we see immediately what this means in terms of growth. So I think let's not have the illusion that everything was wrong in the past, that we work together with the rest of the world. No, this is very important. This is the model of cooperation in Europe that we created after the Second World War. We have, however, to do it, as Ursula Plasnik has rightly said, and you, Jose, as well, in a less naive way. I'm not sure, Jose, that we have done it like private businesses. I know no businessman who puts all his eggs in one basket. I think there's a very important principle for business decisions that's called diversification. So to buy 80% of your gas from one dictator, well, at least a businessman would have bought it from 5 dictators. And I think we as democracies should make sure that there's no way the United States and hopefully many, many other democracies in there. I'm not worried if you have 5% or 5% here, but 80%, that's a bit too much. And I'm still puzzled that I see no people in the street protesting against 80% of purchases of Russian gas. People protest in the street and an agreement with the South American democracies. I'm really puzzled by that. And I think we have to change a little bit our thinking. Because you spoke about Mercosur. Mercosur, let's be very frank, when I came to Austria 3 years ago, I was told by my staff, very good people, very experienced, there's 3 things you should never discuss in Austria. Neutrality, nuclear energy, and Mercosur. I failed to understand the third one, because when I ask people what does Mercosur stand for, they say it's bad. Mercosur means, at the end of the day, it's the Mercado del Sur. It's basically the attempt to work in South America across borders to create peace, prosperity between countries, to abolish customs duties, to work together. This is a bad thing. That's what we're doing in Europe. And we cannot work together with a continent where you try to work across borders and to do the same thing what we try here in Europe since 70 years. So I think it's important that we demystify and de-demonize this debate. It will be very difficult, and Ursula Plastik and I will have to have many discussions with many people, and we will be sometimes frustrated, but I think it's worth doing it, because the idea that the rules-based international system is dead is wrong. But it's also wrong to think it will be easy just to keep it if we don't engage. And as you said, Jose, this requires leadership. If politicians say, sorry, I can't do anything. Here are my farmers, and there are the others. I cannot move on this thing, and there are elections next year, and the populists will win it if I don't do something. Well, the populists will win it always if a politician doesn't do something. So I think leadership means explaining also what makes sense, explaining it ahead of the election, then win the election on this basis. People are not stupid. But sometimes politicians in all countries think politicians are clever, the people are stupid, and therefore we shouldn't tell them the truth. I think we should tell them the truth, that if we don't cooperate with the rest of the world, the level of wealth that we have will not be kept, and also the rules-based international system will not be kept. And we have allies in the world, we just have to do something to work together with them.
Nothing is given, in fact. We have to keep developing it and engage in the debate. Otherwise, if you don't have the public support, you might lose it in the end. I would like to use the rest of the time and give the floor to the audience and collect some comments or questions. And I wonder who would like to take the floor. And yes, there are already 3 people raising their hands. A microphone is coming. Let's start here in the 3rd row in the middle. Please present yourself, introduce yourself, and pose your question or give your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Dietmar Pichler. I'm a disinformation analyst. My focus is on Russian disinformation in the Western world, especially Western Europe. I want to highlight what you said, Ms. Plasnik, when you spoke about public opinion. First of all, I want to thank you for your clear position, especially in the days before the full-scale invasion. Because what we saw also in our mainstream media was a shame. It was so full of Russian narratives and false balance reporting. I was really shocked, and I'm glad that you gave us an overview of the big picture. This is something we also lack now in public opinion, especially in Austria, which brings me to my question. I don't accuse you, I just ask you, because you have a lot of experience in the Austrian government, why don't we tackle this topic? Why is Europe reacting on the European level? Since 2014, we see what Finland is doing, but Austria, I see no reactions at all. I'm involved in a lot of projects. None of them is Austrian.
Thank you very much. Please.
Okay, so we are doing in that order. I apologize. My name is Artur Koldermasev. I'm the political and informational analyst. Also, thank you for your meaningful contributions. It's especially important for me to hear that as for the Ukrainian citizen. So it's really nice that you host such events. My question is related to something that you've mentioned before. However, I would like to narrow it down and put it to the practical angle. So it will be simple. Which practical steps do you see to battle the so-called enlargement fatigue in European Union? This is the question to all the speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. And there's a 3rd one here. Yes, please.
So, Junsaito, University of Vienna. I am doctoral student. So my first short question is about the transatlantic burden sharing, because I have, if European Union also in the war in Ukraine, so if the Europe or the European Union is too dependent on United States in the military aid, then I afraid so 3 negative consequences. So at first, the transatlantic preference of Baltic state, Poland or Ukraine as a future EU member state is caused or not enhanced, and the Europe is to divide. And the second consequence is should be America could demand the European states to engage, for example, in the Taiwan as a give and take. Okay, the United States help Europe for Ukraine, and now Europe should help United States for Taiwan or for war against China. And that's why, and the final, the last consequence is should be the loss of strategic autonomy of the European Union. And the second question is about, I agree with you, Ms. Prasnik. Now Austria has waken up, and when it comes to the neutrality, and then the most Austrian go back to the cozy bed in which most Austrians feel comfortable. And my question is the meanings or the significance of neutrality after the so-called Zeitenwende. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And back to the panel, Ursula Plasnik. I think there, if I understood correctly, two questions for you. One on how to tackle this disinformation and what is Austria doing, why is it not doing more? And on the issue of neutrality, is there any change, any impact of the war?
Well, normally when I'm asked the question, why don't the Austrians do what the Swedes and the Finns quietly did? My answer is I cannot answer the question. We have to ask Professor Sigmund Freud, because there must be some kind of psychological reason that is hidden in the Austrian psyche, and that disables us to lead a sober and feet on the ground debate on a very mundane issue like security policy. For me, this is not a big, mysterious or monotheistic issue. I sometimes say that Austrians are very monotheistic. The only religion they accept is neutrality, and they're all experts on it. So this doesn't help us. This doesn't help us. Why is there a reluctance to address what's so obvious? Why, if I read Spanish newspapers or listen to Spanish politicians, do the Spaniards in their opinion polls say the #1 threat to Spanish security is Vladimir Putin? And if you ask the same question in Austria, you would, I'm not sure you would get the answer. Huh? Martin Sellmayr, don't be such a pessimist. So very difficult to explain why there is a reluctance to discuss it. I think part of the truth is that we always, in these polls, we keep asking self-fulfilling questions, self-answering questions. It's like asking a child or children, do you like sweets? What will they say? Okay? So asking Austrians, do you love neutrality? They will say yes, 80%, 90%. So we have to recalibrate the questions. We have to become less emotional in the questions we ask ourselves. We really seriously have to ask ourselves, what about our protection? This is the #1 state duty, government's duty towards the citizens, to protect them. And what helps? What is a means to achieve that end? Neutrality is not an end in itself. It's not a magical trick. It's not some kind of protective cap you put on. It's not something that makes you invisible. Sometimes I have the feeling that Austrians would like to be totally invisible. You know,
a little bit at least.
In bed, still, and go on dreaming. But maybe this is all what the poll makers and the politicians want us to believe. I also tend to believe that Austrians and people in general are much more street smart and much more intelligent than sometimes politicians think. I think that politicians lack courage, and that's the problem. Because you also have to be ready to bear the consequences of the responsibility you have. If you think it's necessary and right to discuss security policy and what it means for Austria in very practical terms, then you should do it. And you should not try to figure out whether this is going to be good or bad for your next electoral campaign. But then it's easy to say this thing as a non-acting politician, and it's more difficult if you're in the cage of government. Why we are not doing enough on disinformation? I think an attempt of an answer is that Austrian media have taken such a in Buff, what's that? Eine Ohrfeige, die österreichischen Austrian media have had a slap in the face, and they have, just like politics, they have lost credibility in the eyes of the consumer. And that makes them very insecure. So they are not ready and capable of leading this debate also, because it's a debate that has to be led both by politics and the media. And you can't do that if they are in a state of insecurity where they are fighting for the, I mean, look at the printed press issue. Who reads a newspaper? I have to go around, chase for the newspapers like a hunter, you know, I have to be the first at my traffic, and I have to order the New York Times and things like that. So it's really weird. Nobody reads newspapers any longer, so how do you steer, how do you create a public debate? By writing letters to your government? I hate the idea. I'm not a subordinate who writes a letter to the government in order to be allowed to lead a debate. We don't care enough. We are not motivated enough. We are not, we are probably too comfortable. Or is it that we do have a more generalized Ohnmachtsgefühl, the feeling that we can't change anything, that nothing makes a difference? So maybe we have to wake up people to face realities in the sense of make them believe that you can change things. We do it in we do it with other, we do it in the economy, we do it in private business. So why should we be able to do it when our own security is concerned?
Thank you. Ignacio, maybe you want to also respond to the disinformation issue?
Yeah, no, but also, you know, I sit at the board of the Felipe González Foundation, and you know we had a referendum on NATO in 1986, and Felipe González always says that, you know, they spend so much time looking at the wording of the question for the referendum. They had like 10 different versions, and they will polling and doing test and test. One of the things he found, he says, is that, you know, if you change the question from are you in favor or against NATO membership to are you against or in favor of the Atlantic Alliance, there were 10 points more of support for being member. Because, you know, who is against the Atlantic? You know, and an alliance, you know, it's like, it's not nothing, you know, that's a fact of life. And he said, you know, but we couldn't put to people the only true question which would have made everyone happy, which was, would you want your country to be member of NATO with you voting against? And people would say yes, you know, because people didn't want to. You know, I'm a peace-loving person. That's a decision for you to decide. You know, you take us into NATO, and then if it's a mess, you know, we will suck you out of power. So just that. On this information, recently, you know, the External Action Service, they have this info mechanism and system, and they've been debunking all kind of fake news and disinformation campaigns from Russia. But one amazing thing is that their mandate does not allow them to work inside the European Union. So they can identify the narratives, they can say which narratives are false, they can say who produces these narratives, but then the minute the narrative crosses the border, then they say that's a responsibility of the member states. And, you know, this is absolutely crazy, you know. And so then there are member states which may be more up to the job, less up to the job, depending on many things. You just provide the blueprint, and then you decide whether to do it at home. Does this make sense? You know, to have a limitation of a mandate? You know, the narratives don't know borders. Do we have to explain, you know, this? And then you cannot identify Russian proxies. You cannot then identify fake media and these campaigns and who is reproducing that. You're banned at the EU level from studying that. You have to do it, as you know, yourself at home on your own means, you know, which is absolutely crazy. There's an information war going on. And, you know, if you've decided to take one hand to your back because you don't have the right mandate to do that, and I don't think that makes any sense.
Ivan, you want to say something on on transatlantic relations and dependencies, or on enlargement fatigue. I think these were the two issues that are still open.
Let's first on this burden sharing. The problem is, and this is a very famous saying among the military, budgets do not fight wars. You can have a budget, and of course it's well known that the United States has a military budget which is bigger than the combined military budgets of the 10 next countries. But the problem in Europe, which come with the Russian invasion, in many places is a cultural issue. We are post-war in a much more profound sense that we don't have a high military budget. By the way, the combined budgets of the EU military budget is not so low. Listen, in Germany, and Martin is going to tell me if it's wrong, I was told that till very recently, if you're a military officer, you go to work in civilian clothes, and you're going basically to change into uniform when you go basically in the military unit, because simply people didn't like to see military people. It was not prestigious. You're not saying this. So imagine if this is the case, what kind of selection of people you're going to have, how it works, and so on. So to try to convince people that you should do this or that, it's not just the budget issue. Then the relations of basically people to their own armies. For good reasons. The problem of the European Union at the moment is, and I very much agree with the story, that we can decide a mistake if we're going to say that we did everything wrong, because in a certain way, Europe now is the victim of its successes, not of its failure. We were so good to pacify the Union that now you basically should try to explain people. This was not part of the social contract anymore. The governments don't believe that they have the right of people to die if they're not professional soldiers. And this is a different situation. It's a totally different. This cannot be solved on the level of budgets. And you can see immediately, do you know which is the highest as a percent budget of a country in European Union? Greece, 4 years, 5%. Poor country. They were on the break of their economy. They never reduced their military budgets. Why? Because their population was sharing the idea that they're under threat. Is it right or wrong? It's totally different. But in a certain way, what should change is attitudes. And before going, basically, this is also the problem with disinformation. I should be very kind of on the wrong side of debate. But have you ever seen, do you ever believe that we ourselves are the victim of disinformation? No. Because normally we believe that disinformation explains why some people disagree with us. Normally people go for the information that they want. And you know it on many issues. And of course there are narratives, but you go for these narratives because you like them. And I'm saying this because the same goes for neutrality. Austria, you believe that you're neutral countries? In the eyes of whom? Do you believe that the Russians, the President Putin, believe that Austria is a neutral country? Sanctioning and so on. Neutrality is like beauty. It is in the eyes of the others. No, but I'm not saying this ironically. This is very important. It's identity. We don't have such a famous doctors like Freud in Bulgaria. But I do believe that it is very important, basically, to face certain realities. And I'm saying this because there is no enlargement fatigue anymore. This is something different when it comes to the next enlargement. The fear of uncertainty. We do not know anymore what the enlargement of the Union means. The enlargement fatigue was in a totally different situation of normality. We can do it, we cannot, and with the Western Balkans it was critical. We created a waiting room in which all these countries can stay forever, and then they're in and out, and then you understand that waiting room is the emergency room. And you cannot ask them to stay there anymore. And from this point of view, this is different. It's not about fatigue anymore. This is, do we know what it means? Do you really are ready to give all these countries veto in the European politics? Can you force others to accept the majority voting in order to make it effective? Because many of these countries, I said that Ukraine is a big country. This is not true for many others. Basically, if North Macedonia, Albania, or any of the Western Balkan countries decided to join the European Union, in economic terms, nobody's going to understand. The impact of the economy is going to be so small that it's non-issue. But then you said what it means to have a union of 33, what it means to have a union of 35. And this is a different question. This is not about fatigue. I do believe that fatigue is not explaining. Simply, you understand that it's a different animal. But you don't know what is the animal, and also you don't know which is the zoo in which it is living.
Martin, maybe fatigue is not the right word, but do we have enough support for a speedy enlargement which is on the horizon?
Yes, I agree that fatigue is not the right word, because we are never tired here, at least not on this podium. Also,
we're just waking up. I mean, we cannot be tired.
We are woken up already. No, but I think we also should be careful. The enlargement of the European Union is not new members added to a golf club. It comes with huge rights and obligations. Therefore, to think about that before we do it is the right thing. To prepare for that is the right thing. And we should never give this up. I think we had a situation that on both sides, on the European Union side, we were busy with a lot of internal crises, from the financial crisis to the pandemic, and in the Western Balkans, which is where this word was most applied, we had a situation where countries were flirting with several attractive partners at the same time. And that is when you want to get married, that's not at least in our monotheistic Austria, at least not acceptable to do that. That's why we have been very clear, and I think I see this now. Putin has accelerated and redynamized our enlargement process against his own will, because we have to say Ukraine becomes a member of the European Union because they are defending our values. Therefore, the same applies also to those countries who are close to us and are waiting since a long time. But we have to tell them at the same time, you have to make a decision. Stop flirting with Putin, with China, commit. Because if you don't commit, we're not going to marry you. So that's, I think, what we have at the moment. I see something happening there. I see something now, for example, the agreements between Serbia and Kosovo on normalization that have been concluded and prepared, almost finalized in the last weeks. I think they would have been unthinkable in the last 3 years. They're only there because there is now a totally different dynamic. I would not exaggerate. It will not lead to membership tomorrow, but it will lead to membership sooner or later. And I think also the institutional question that I think if we go into detail, everybody will fall asleep. But institutions will be solved. And we have most of the solution already in the current treaties. I want to say a word about Austrian neutrality, because Ursula Plasninger accused me of pessimism, which is, of course, I think you are the first person on the planet who has accused me of pessimism. And it was only because you mentioned Austrian opinion polls. So on Austrian opinion polls, I am a bit pessimistic, but not on the issue of neutrality. I would say neutrality is, in my experience as an outside observer, is a holy cow that everybody believes in. But it allows you to do almost everything what is necessary, if you want. Because Austria is since 1995 member of the European Union. It has written into its constitution that it is also member of the common foreign and security policy. And I have not seen any decision, and I'm speaking purely as a lawyer, that would be if there is will, is not possible. I see in the last weeks and months, there is no single decision that we have taken in support of Ukraine, including military, where Austria has created any problems. Austria has participated in financing. Austria has participated everything where it was non-lethal. And in the other part, it has used the possibility of constructive abstention, but helped out somewhere else. So it is not as black and white. I think this is a decision for Austria to say what it does with its neutrality. But I understand the history behind it. And as long as this neutrality doesn't prevent the European Union from moving ahead, I think it's perhaps also time that Austria needs a bit of time, because military help at the moment from Austria is probably not the first thing that Ukraine needs, if I may be so blunt. So I think, therefore, let's take the time and do that, have an honest debate, that's clear, but I don't think it's a problem for the other countries of the European Union. I just want to say that. There was a very important question on China, which nobody is daring to answer because it brings you into all kinds of trouble.
Go ahead, go ahead.
If you
like trouble.
Yes, exactly. No, I would say 3 things on that, because I think it's very important that we discuss China. The president of the Commission gave a very, very important speech on the 30th of March. If you haven't read it, you should read it, because I think we have a new China policy in the European Union that the president of the Commission has announced. We have totally understood that China that we once defined a bit awkwardly a systemic rival, a partner, a competitor, is more a rival today, a systemic rival, than anything else. But we still need China and some other things. On the issue that you mentioned, I think we have a clear one China policy as the European Union, as Josep Borrell has clarified after some misunderstandings that were probably not deliberate. And I think that's very important because that's also part of our work with China. But we have also a clear policy that any unilateral change in the region, in the Taiwan Strait, is something that we would fundamentally oppose. That's the position of all 27 member states of the European Union, put again and again into all our joint decisions. And Ursula Plasnik is reading European Council and Council conclusions. I wish that sometimes others did this as well, because it's black and white written there. And there's a third element that I would like to add, because we are discussing here so much about the geopolitical position of Europe. There's US, there's China, there's Russia. There is no equidistance of the European Union towards China and towards the United States of America. The United States of America is not always an easy partner, but it's our partner. It shares our values, democracy, pluralism, freedom, and it supports that. We work together in NATO with almost all countries of the European Union, some more now than a couple of years ago. NATO is not something where one dictates. It's an international organization where we work together, where America has a huge role. And I think sometimes perhaps it's unpopular to say that we should be a bit more grateful for that. Because you said that, Jose. We have sourced out our security. I think it's not totally true. We have not totally sourced it out, but a lot. So we expect this decision that Ivan mentioned, that somebody dies to defend us. We're not daring to send our own people there, but we expect the Americans to do that. No, I think it's right. That's why the request on burden sharing, that didn't start with President Trump. It started much earlier. Is absolutely justified, and I think it's good that we all do that, and that we also as European Union can make a contribution. What is our biggest contribution to that? That we consolidate and make more efficient the work on military in Europe on the industrial side. At the moment, every country in Europe is buying their own military equipment. Only 11% where 3 years ago of military purchases were done cross-border with one other country of the European Union. Now it's a bit above 18%. Our objective is 35%. It's still very modest. Just to make sure that we don't buy all the same tank, all the same helicopter that can't work together. And I think that's our biggest contribution, because as Ivan said, we are spending a lot on military in Europe. But everybody spends it in their corner and we don't do it efficiently. Economies of scale can help. And that's probably the biggest contribution, on which at some point also Austria may contribute, but because contributing to an internal market of defense product is not against neutrality, at least as I understand the doctrine. So I'm much more optimistic than Ursula Plasnik thinks, and I hope that also on Austria, I'm sometimes critical of Austria when it comes to some European policy decisions, for example on Schengen, because Schengen.
But we're not starting this discussion.
No, you have to give me that. On Schengen, I would like just to say, as we speak about security here, every enlargement of Schengen makes the European Union more secure, and because we can use the police officers, they're at the moment watching a couple of months ago from Slovenian border, the Croatians, we can use them at the external border. That is very, very efficient. So let's keep doing that. If there are problems, let's solve them, but let's commit to that. And I think that's also possible for a neutral country.
As a Bulgarian, I agree.
Yes, and as an Austrian, I agree too. Anyway, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and there are so many issues on the table that I think we will need a series of additional debates, which goes along with what Ursula Plasnik pushed and asked for, and we will try to deliver on this. Having said this, I would like to thank you very much on the screens, but in particular here in the audience for coming out here and sharing this moment for us with us. I think the debate was very, very interesting and very intense. Thank you for coming. And I would also like very much to thank the panel, Ursula Plasnik, Ignacio Torreblanca, Ivan Kraschev, Martin Selmayr for joining us here today. And I would take up one suggestion. We try to get the coordinates of Sigmund Freud and try to invite him for our next conference. I think it will help us a lot to understand what's going on. More debates are needed, and we make sure this is going to take place. Bilaterally, we would like to continue discussing those issues with you. We've prepared some finger food and wine outside, and hope you join us. And yes, let's keep in touch. Thank you for coming.
You have always the most eloquent sentence.